right, so I get some questions that are asked to me. What's a good vegetable to grow in an SHTF situation? So you want to be able to, if you're bugging out or whatever, and you want to be able to grow some food, and you want to be able to start to plan for that now before you bug out. Because once you get these plants established in an area where you know you're going to bug out, these plants will come up regular, and when you go to forage, you'll just be able to visit these spots long before you need to worry about planting them, because they will reseed themselves. So I did a video not that long ago about the Three Kings garden system. I pulled that video down because it was kind of talking about how it'd be good for minors and young adults and children to be able to get involved. And once YouTube came out with the no child policy, not made for kids and all that, I had to pull a video down because I didn't know if they were going to rate that video as made for kids. And then next thing you know, kids are watching a video that's perfectly fine, there's no cursing or anything in it, that I might get flagged for not made for kids, and I didn't announce that, and so it was too risky. And so I just pulled the video down, and I can't make anything for kids unless I declare it for that. And even though YouTube takes my videos and they share it on KidTube, YouTube has like a kids thing, so they share my videos on KidTube or whatever it's called, but my videos aren't made for kids. So if my videos ain't made for kids, then why YouTube sharing it on KidTube? I don't know, because YouTube's got their ideas in the wrong area. So anyway, I do get asked, what's a good source of a vegetable for me to grow in an SHTF situation and you're bugging out? Well, first of all, I want to make sure we're clear on the fact that it's going to kind of depend on whether you know where you're going to bug out, and you can pre-plant these plants a couple years in advance and establish those plants in those areas, so they can grow, then self-seed, then grow, then self-seed, and that kind of a thing. So you don't have to really worry about planting them when you're going to bug out. So keep that in mind. If you're going to bug out and you're going to suddenly start planting stuff the day you bug out, things may be a little bit different, and you're going to be waiting a lot longer than if you were to do it in advance and let the plants acclimatize or acclimate to the area, and then they reseed and self-seed after a few years. They'll put out fruit much earlier than if you were to bug out that day, and then you're going to start your planting. You're going to have to wait for those plants to come up and kind of get used to things, and you're not going to get as early of a crop when you do that. So keep that in mind. That's really important for you. But we're going to talk about some of the vegetables I would recommend for an SHTF situation, and what kind of fruit production can you get from it, and is it life-sustaining food? So the first thing I want to start with is tomatoes in general. And the type of tomatoes that I would recommend for an SHTF situation would be like this tomato right here, which grows pretty much wild all around my property and has been for the last 10 years. And that is the Everglade tomato. It's a currant tomato. It's a Solanum pimpinellifolium. And these tomatoes will grow, reproduce seed, and just acclimatize to the environment after about two years, roughly. They'll really acclimatize, and then the plant will become literally invincible to everything around it, even blight, because this plant will grow so fast. If there is blight that gets to it, it'll grow faster than the blight can get to it. And when you grow them in a wild environment, they can get very large. So keep that in mind with the Everglade tomato. They make, it's a morale booster, tomatoes in an SHTF situation. It's also good for you. It's a different kind of a food. It's got a little bit of acidity to it, and that you kind of want that a little bit when you're, in a wild. You kind of want something a little bit acidy as well for digestive purposes. And you can make sauces with the Everglade tomato. You can eat them raw. You can also, you can do a lot of things with these tomatoes just like you could do with any other tomato. It's just they're very small, but they're highly productive. These plants will produce 5-gallon. One plant can produce 5-gallon pail or more. One plant of these little tomatoes. Not all at once, but it'll produce it throughout the season. So you'll be eating tomatoes off of that plant for the entire growing season. Now, if it's winter time, obviously you're not going to be growing anything. And if you're bugging out in the winter, well, I feel sorry for you. But if you're bugging out like in the spring and you know you're going to need the plant, this is a good way to do it. That's why I suggest if you know where you're bugging out, then pre-plant all of this stuff and establish it first. It'll come up on its own when it's ready to sprout, and it'll just start growing very fast. Rather than you having to worry about planting, it'll grow on its own, just like wild raspberries, just like wild blackberries, that kind of a thing. You can very easily establish this variety of tomato in your growing area, and it will be very prolific. It will actually start to dominate areas. So that's like the number one thing I would suggest you establish or grow in a bug out situation. And the other thing I would suggest, and I think I included this in my Three Kings garden system originally. It was the this thing here. Where is it? It's the mini mouse melon, or there's another name for it. It's called a gherkin. That's what it is. The Mexican sour gherkin. I'm just looking for one here. All right, I have to go over here. I got a few of them growing there too. And then once they get going, guys, these things will produce these little mini cucumber things by the hundreds. I love eating these things. It's like eating little mini cucumbers. You know, it's you can eat these things literally non-stop. And with plants, like these plants can be extremely prolific. They can literally produce thousands of these little mini mouse melons. I don't have any to show you. Maybe I'll include an image, you know, right here where you can see what it looks like. And you just eat the whole thing. It looks like a tiny little mini watermelon. Tastes very similar to a cucumber, and they're very good. And they will provide you with plenty of nutrients, and they will fill your belly during those times. So this is what it looks like. This is the vine. It's a very thin vine. And you can see they're very prolific. They come up when they're ready to come up. Like, I didn't plant none of these vines here. These things pop up all around my garden and all around the area every year. They come up in random areas. I don't even know how to get there sometimes. Like here, I don't know how these got in here. I never planted these here. Somehow a seed got up here, maybe a mouse or a bird dropped its droppings and the seed got there. I don't know. But they're here, and I'm letting them grow, and I'm just letting them kind of fall down and then create this little thing here. And I'm going to let the melons and the mouse melons grow here. They're also growing all the way down here, and then they're going to grow up the wall. By the end of the summer, these plants will have grown all the way down, all the way up, all the way to the top, and the whole thing will be completely covered with these plants, believe it or not. By then, hopefully my peppers will all be fruiting by then, so I don't care if it, you know, they don't get as much sunlight. But this is one of the vegetables I would highly recommend establishing, and it might take you a year or two to establish it in your bug out area. But once you get this plant established, this plant will provide you with food that you don't generally have to even worry about, you know, planting every year. And if you want to plant it, you can. But once you get it established, it will come up on its own every year, and you won't have to worry about, you know, whether you're going to have food in your little bug out area or not. Now, if you're going to bug out somewhere you never bugged out before, I don't even know if growing a garden is going to be an option for you, because that's not really generally a good idea if you just bug out somewhere you don't know where you're bugging out, and then you shelter in place in that area and, you know, man post for a long period of time. It's not the way you bug out. You have to stay on the move because of animals and people tracking you and things like that. So, but if you have an area you know you can bug out for like months, if not years on end, without being harassed or bothered or anything like that, that's where this will come out. That's where it's most effective. But to try and grow vegetables in a unknown bug out area and you don't know the environment, you're going to have to move around anyway. But you can still establish these plants somewhere in a wild that you know you can even hike to and get to, and you'll have food. So, and I wouldn't and I also don't recommend just planting these in one spot. Plant them in like 10 or 15 different spots. Get them established in like 15 different areas. Same thing with the tomatoes. Same thing with everything. So if one of them fail or gets eaten up by bears or dogs or wolves or whatever, you can go to another spot where you'll probably have one of those spots out of that 10 or 12 areas that you established will provide you with food. So you increase your likelihood of survival when you spread yourself out. Don't just plant in one spot. Here's my little thing, and then I'm going to go back there every day. No, you really spread yourself out. You got to plant them in like 10 different areas, far away from each other, and then establish that, and then you should be good to go. You'll always have that variety of vegetable growing there. Another thing I also recommend making sure is established is this, and this is called purslane. Now, purslane is a really good plant. It's a good vegetable plant to eat. I think it was actually originally brought here. It's an invasive species now, but it was originally brought here as a vegetable from Europe back in, I don't know, 1600s or something like that. During the colonial times, that plant was originally brought here for that reason. And now it's invasive. It grows like a weed everywhere, and you can't get rid of it. Well, the good news about purslane is it's perfectly edible. You can eat every part of this plant. And it's very easy to establish a purslane patch once you get it established. It's pretty much self-governing. It's a self-sustaining food. It's very equivalent to lettuce. It's maybe very slightly mucilaginous like aloe vera, but in general, it's a great eating vegetable. I eat it all the time. Pick a leaf right now, right? Tastes just like lettuce, maybe a little bit of wildness to it. That's fine. But this is something too, if you don't see purslane growing in your bug out area, you can even just harvest seeds that are growing wild in your lawn from purslane, and then make sure it establishes where you're growing, where you're going to be bugging out. Very excellent wild plant vegetable to eat. Make sure it's established where you're going, and so you also have this, a great leafy green to grow outside of lettuce. Lettuce is good, but it takes time. It takes certain types of lettuce to grow wild. In order for you to get your leafy greens. And I'll show you a couple other vegetables I would recommend growing wild, because I've been experimenting with a lot of different vegetables. So we did your tomatoes, we did your Mexican sour gherkins, those are your type cucumber type. We were also showing you some leafy greens, which is your purslane. You want to make sure that that's established. Easy to grow, maintenance free, and if you lay a good bed of soil down, these things can get absolutely enormous and provide you bowls upon bowls full of leafy green edibles. Another thing you can establish, what I would recommend, is the sunberry right here. Now, this plant is in the nightshade family, so there is some caution you got to be careful with when you're growing this particular plant. But once you get used to it and you understand how it is, you're not going to get sick or poison yourself or anything like that. The sunberry, or wonderberry, it goes by a couple of names. One bad thing is that the flea beetles love to eat this plant up. So once you plant that stuff, you're going to get flea beetle mania. So don't just plant like one or two plants. You got to make sure you get patches of it, because the flea beetles will wipe some of the stuff out. But this plant is very aggressive. It grows in all kinds of conditions. It could grow in shady areas. It can grow in full sun. And it produces black sunberries. I'll show you an image right up here. It produces these black little berries that are nice and sweet. You can make a wine out of it. You can make a drink out of it, or you can just eat the berries. It's a morale booster because it's nice and sweet, and it's a nice after dinner type of snack. And this is definitely a plant that I would highly recommend establishing in your bug out area, because it will produce a ton of fruit, and it'll keep you alive. So make sure that you get some of these planted and established in your bug out area. And you can also include those. These are sunberries, but over here we got wild tomatillos, and these are edible too. But you got to kind of fill yourself out with those. But you can establish your tomatillos there too. It's also another food source, and once they establish, they'll spread everywhere, and they'll come up every year for you. You can actually turn your whole bug out area into a massive foraging garden that's spread out everywhere with very little maintenance and almost to no maintenance. You just need to get there and harvest it, and just be careful of the bears, because they like these things too. And here's some more tomatillos. You can establish these. These will self-seed and come up every year for you as well. Okay, they're not. You don't even have to worry about planting them. They'll just regenerate themselves. Basil is a good option if it'll self-seed. If you want to add that for a spice, basil's good. Also, too, if you want to add a spice to your natural growing conditions, this particular variety of oregano is unlike any oregano I've ever grown before. I'm not even really sure where I got the seed from this or how it even established itself. So I'm not 100% sure. It's cold hardy. The root system will live all the way through 10, 15 below zero. It doesn't fully die, and it comes back every year, and it produces an absolute ton of fresh oregano. I mean, it's unbelievable how much this plant actually produces. I mean, I'll have to stand back. I've never had an oregano plant get this absolutely enormous. And this thing seeds like crazy. So I've been pulling nothing but oregano plants out of the ground like weeds. So once you establish this particular variety of oregano anyway, this particular variety of oregano will absolutely take over large patches, and you'll always have oregano, fresh oregano, to add to your cooking and, your bug out situation. When you're hungry and you want to add a little spice to things, you can eat the fresh oregano. Will help it'll help boost your morale. The other thing I want to suggest in your bug out, like for example right here, this is a type of it's not wild lettuce like you've seen people. I've done videos on wild lettuce. This particular variety of lettuce, I'm not even sure where it came from. It just popped up one day in my garden, and it pops up now and again around my yard, and I'm not even really sure where it came from. It might be a lettuce that I established or grew early at one time. But this is an absolutely delicious lettuce. It's really good in the beginning, but at this stage it's obviously going to be bitter. But when you get this plant early in the season, this lettuce is absolutely delicious. And it reseeds itself, and it produces massive amounts of these heads of lettuce like you see here. So this is a good lettuce to establish in your bug out situation. I don't know what the name of this kind of lettuce is or where it even came from. But right now everything bolted and laid down because of the heavy rains and everything. But to be honest with you, if you get it early, it'll produce hundreds of heads. You don't even have to pick the whole head. You could just pick off the leaves you want, and you'll get the lettuce. Now, what kind of lettuce this is, I don't know. I just call it wild lettuce. I might offer seed for this, at the end of the year. I'll offer seed for it and just, let you choose whether you want to buy that kind of lettuce or not. But really, any kind of lettuce will self-seed itself at some point. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you that I'm looking for, and I don't... Oh, right here. Now, I grow a lot of brassicas, guys. I grow a lot of brassicas, and I all let them seed. And I try to see what brassicas are going to seed and provide me the best kind of food and reseed itself and basically grow plentiful in a wild situation. And so I grow a lot of things. Some things are better than others, and some things are just not. Like a lot of broccolis are okay. They will winter over, actually. And they will reseed themselves if you let some parts of it go to seed, but never really comes true or gives you, heads of broccoli. You're going to be eating the leaves more than the broccoli and the stems. But this is called Russian red kale. And I've been letting this Russian red kale come up randomly and grow on its own. I never planted this. This is growing in hard soil that I never did anything with. And you can see that it just came up on its own, and it's growing massively. And it's growing very, very well. And so you can see I have slug problems. They're literally chewing my kale apart, which is okay. I'm not worried about that because, as you can see here, they go to seed every year. And then if I was to establish this in a part of my yard that I can dedicate to just this red Russian kale, this would come up on its own every year, and I would never have to plant it, except the only problem I have is I got a severe slug problem in the area, and they just destroy my crops no matter what I grow. So that's one of the reasons why I don't go too crazy with it. But I do let it go to seed, and I offer the seed on my website. So that's the main reason why I just let it go. Though I am eating the leaves off it, but it gets really bad with the slugs. But this is a great vegetable that once you establish it and it goes to seed, like this will go to seed by the end of the year. It'll produce all the leaf you need in the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the year, it'll eventually turn into this. You'll get these nice little flowers, and then you get these little things that stick out, and that's where your seed is, and it'll do that in the first year. A lot of times, cauliflowers or broccolis or things like that, they may not seed their first year. So they may have to biannual, go over a year, and then they go to seed. Sometimes they do. It depends. But this one, almost every year, if you let it sit all the way into the all the way to the end of the fall, this will end up going to seed, and it'll reestablish itself. I mean, this can literally take over fields. So the red Russian kale is a really, really good option for a vegetable. This is a great leafy green to eat in your salads. I highly recommend that if you can't get to lettuce. It's also very, very good for your digestive tract and stuff like that. It's a very important vegetable you would want to include into your bug out situation. And that's really about it. The only other thing I would recommend, or you can grow it as, if you want to add this to your repertoire. Here's another one right here. This is called chicory. This particular variety of chicory is called Castellafranco, I think, chicory, and it produces a leaf type lettuce stuff, but it's astringent. It's very tangy and astringent. It's not going to generally be a sweet like lettuce type thing, so you got to be okay with that. But it is edible, and you can eat it, and a lot of times foods that are astringent like that are really good for your liver. So in general, this plant can be grown just the way you see it here. What you see here is one plant that I let go to seed, and I forgot to harvest the seed. The plant fell over. It stayed over the winter. And here we are now with this giant, enormous mass here. So the reason why I'm leaving it go now is because it's going to go to seed again, which it already is doing. You can see my zoom is sticking. You can see all the flowers and all the buds and all that. I'm going to collect the seed and then offer that on the website. But this is the Castellafranco chicory, and if you don't know about chicories, learn about chicories. You can bury them, and the heads will grow underground. That's how you get those chicory heads. But if not, and you let it grow wild like this, it's going to grow kind of like a weed. But you can eat these leaves. These leaves are absolutely perfectly fine. This is a good leaf. I might even pick this one and use this in my salad. This is a nice healthy leaf without any slug slime. And if you get them early in the season, a lot of times they're not that bitter if you get them early in the season. But once they go into the bolting stage, they're going to be bitter. But it's not unedible. If you can eat dandelion leaves, you can eat this easily. All right, and then last but not least, what I would recommend establishing is your beans. Like, for example, these are Romano pole beans, and these vines can grow to 30, 40, 50 feet long, depending on the conditions, and they can produce literally thousands of beans. And the good thing about beans in general, is that you can dry them out and store them for the winter. So that's where the beans are going to provide you with proteins, and they're also going to provide you with complex carbohydrates, and you're going to be able to consume that during the winter time when you don't have any other food. So establishing beans is absolutely necessary in a bug out situation, okay? Because you can't just depend on rabbits all winter when you're starving, okay? Because that's not a good idea to do. So you're going to need something else to go with the rabbit, okay? And you can't just eat lean meats. You can't eat rats and squirrels and that's all you eat. You have to eat some kind of fiber with that food because it's not healthy and it can be dangerous. So beans is definitely a good source of protein as well as the fiber. And it'll go in sequence with all the other vegetables you're eating. So I highly recommend establishing some kind of a bean. You can pick the variety you want. This is a pole bean, This is the Romano pole bean. I think over here is the Kentucky Wonder Bean. Very similar to the Romano pole bean. It's a better bean for when you're drying beans. It's a better for dried beans. This bean is better for fresh beans, but it's also good for drying too. You can dry them out and store them just as well. But I like eating fresh beans, and so the Romano beans is my #1 choice when it comes to eating fresh green beans. And then, of course, if you don't want to go with the viney type, you can always go with the bush or the runner beans. The runner beans are very similar to pole beans, except they only grow so long, and they only wrap themselves like halfway around stuff, and they flop all over the place. They're good, but they're floppy. Same thing with bush beans. Bush beans are generally, they grow to about 2, maybe 3 feet tall, and then they flop over. So you got to make sure you support them or just let them grow wild. But that's another good bug out variety of bean if you want to go with bush. But definitely, I would suggest going with the pole beans, because you can let them grow right up the side of trees, and it'll produce thousands of beans, guys. One plant, you get a handful of those growing around trees and establish that. Not only will it provide you with beans for the winter, the food, but it can even potentially even self-start itself. I've had these pop up as well. As long as if the beans break from the pods and land on the ground, it'll self-seed itself. So it's a really good variety to grow. I wouldn't, as far as like other vegetables like corn and pumpkins, yeah, you can kind of establish that, but I mean, pumpkins, believe it or not, I've seen pumpkins that were growing like in the middle of nowhere. Pumpkins, like, you know, full-size pumpkins with, like, you know, the full vines, maybe 10 or 20-foot vines, and 2 or 3 pumpkins in the middle of the woods. I've seen that, and that's because the pumpkins actually establish themselves. They form the pumpkin fruit, then the pumpkin rots, and those seeds will eventually get into the soil, and then they plant, and then they just keep growing. It can go on for years, but it's not guaranteed. So, I mean, you can use pumpkin if you want. That's another plant that might potentially self-seed. And but what I showed you here is generally what I would suggest as far as you know, your bug out vegetables. That's good enough for, you know, for you to get by for a couple of months anyway. If you're going to be there long term, you better start thinking differently than just bugging out. So anyway, that is just my bug out rant, my SHTF vegetable suggestions. I might offer a package deal, like with a mix of beans and seeds into one package for survival situations on my website. When I get time, I'll build a page for it, and then I'll make it, you know, your bug out vegetables. You can watch this video and listen to my suggestions, and I'll put a bunch of packages into one larger package that has all your seeds and that kind of a thing, and my suggestions to it. Plus, you got this video that you can refer to if you need to. All right, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.